That'd be good. Ghost in the machine today.
A complete ghost in the machine. We have some sort of gremlin. And I think it's funny because we did just read that little fun article on Tom's hardware guide. I'm like, is somebody connecting a banana to our machine here?
Which will make no sense to anybody listening to this. So the reality is we've got a gremlin buzz, which seems to be something to do with Sean's magnetic personality. Because every time you walk around the back, it starts buzzing.
Or it's the repulsion of
maybe yes, yeah. It's your repulsive personality.
Right.
So if anybody hears a buzz on this that we haven't been able to filter out,
gosh.
you will know it's all Sean's fault.
And if we were in like mid conversation and both of us just freeze, it's also because like I have pretty good ears, but you have golden ears, and it's like if we hear it, it'll be like, no, what's happening? Right. Because it's annoying, and I'm like, I don't know where. It's funny because there's nothing. We didn't change anything. I mean, we did, and then I undid it. So maybe that's
just started. So we'll see how this goes.
Today
it's a testament to our professionality if we can talk through the buzz as if nothing's happening.
That's right. I think I know we can. The question is if it happens more than once, like how quickly are we going to be like, stop everything? Right, we must finish. But it was funny because I was the article I was writing, and I'll put a link in the show notes if people are curious. There was a funny article that made me think of you because you do have golden ears. Mine are pretty good, and it's one of those things where I feel like you and I we can share things back and forth, and it'll be like, no one else can hear this thing, but do you hear it? Right. Just with this thing. Right. And we're like, yes, I can detect it. But it's this funny article because it was sort of doing I don't think it was very scientific. The rigor was not exactly high, or at least it's unknown, but it was a fun little test where it put audio files to a blind test, running some of the audio system through weirdly conductive mediums.
Right. So, and of course the setup here is, this is such an esoteric world, but for people that take their audio very, very seriously and are really on the fringe, they invest more money than you would believe in cables.
Yes.
So, in this world, a good cable connecting, say, your CD player or whatever you use to your amplifier may set you back $200, $300 or so. And then you get into silly money with $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 just for a little bit of wire that connects them, and people swear blind that it sounds better.
That they can hear the difference that money cost.
That's right. So then you get back to this test.
Yeah, and I will say, like anyone who goes to like a big retail store, like a Best Buy in the U.S. or a Media Markt in like the rest of the world and all this stuff, there's always that bin of cables next to everything where it's like, oh, you got that new DVD Blu-ray DVD player. There's a $5 HDMI cable or a $90 HDMI or a $400.
I know.
And this one has gold plating on it. So, and then you're of course you're sold this idea of like, well, it's the more expensive the cable, the better experience it is. Of course. And to a certain degree, that I would still argue in certain scenarios.
I would. It makes a difference, but only
if you have the right point. Only up to a point. And you have to have, like, I'm sorry, if you're buying a Blu-ray player out of a big box store, any cable you get is probably going to be fine. But if you have high and sensitive equipment, then of course, it's physics and to a certain extent, right? You have to have the wire, the gauge, and the electrons got to flow. Yep. But so this interesting article was like, okay, we're going to take that to the extreme and see if you could actually hear a difference. And then they just went through and tested like these different mediums where, like, I think one of them was a banana, right? Which is why I'm like,
usually when people do these tests, the progression goes from sort of expensive audio cable to bell wire, which is just a thin little bit of copper. That's usually the benchmark people use. But then, as you say, they say, why you stop at bell wire? Why not put a banana in there?
And then it gets worse. And then I forget what the other pieces they used, but the other one and eventually they got to like actual mud.
Right.
So like think of a tray of mud with like wire in, wire out, and passing that electrical signal through the mud as a conductive material.
And the fun bit of it was most people listening could not tell the difference.
But okay, so I'll have to revisit that because I do want to see who dig into it deeper, because I'm like, I was like, but I want to hear the sample. I want to hear what it sounds. So there is a question. So that's the joke now with this little gremlin in here. I'm like, okay, did someone sneak in here? Where's the bananas? Where's the tray of mud?
So we are going to do this on a future podcast.
Yes.
You realize I'm going to set up an extra mic for you, and I'm going to sort of strip the wires back so I can sort of plug the ends into something. And we're going to see Sean through a banana, Sean through a potato, Sean through a grape.
Okay, counterpoint to that idea. We put the medium under the table so nobody can see. We don't say it. And then you have to guess, is Andrew talking through mud or a banana, or is Sean talking through mud or a banana? And we won't know. And we'll have to do a big reveal at the end.
Right.
I think now that's a podcast I would watch.
Okay. We're on for this.
Yeah, we're on for this. Okay. So we can take a sort of a pause-ish here and kind of jump in, because I had the thought. So I was listening to our own show as one does. And
our prime listener.
Hey, if
those 100 listens are actually short 100 times.
There's always at least for what are we episodes we're on? I think we're recording our 74th-ish episode today. I have at least listened to every episode one time, so I can count. I'm in the totals. But I was listening to our episode about the workshop that we gave, where we kind of went into detail about the futures triangle and then the intent map. And I was like, hey, I've got an idea. Let's talk more stuff like that.
More future stuff.
But also, and I'm also in the mix right now too of putting courses together and stuff like this too. So I'm like, this is I am literally living this material day in and day out.
We can take this one of two ways. Either this is the cheap episode where, because this is what's in your brain, you just splurge it out, or this is the expensive freebie where you get to hear what other people pay big bucks to hear.
That's true.
When Sean actually teaches
and
them.
I think it's not mutually exclusive. Both can be true. But I've also in long tradition of Sean sort of ill-conceived ideas for an audio medium, as I've picked a very visual tool to talk about. So
we're going to talk about the thing where you actually have to see it.
Oh my God, yes.
Made not for radio.
And I think I'm going to do my best to articulate and describe this thing, because it is a simple tool. Yes. And there's a callback to like a really early episode. I think I should have looked this up to again make sure I don't screw up the name, but it's like the aphasia. Is that the right word? Where you can imagine the ability to visually imagine things when you talk about them in your mind.
I think it is. Goodness me.
I'm going to look it up real quick.
Yes, because aphasia could be something totally different.
Oh yeah, no, that's a language disorder.
I was going to say.
No, what? Oh my God, what is it? I forget now.
But no, I know what you mean. It's that sort of test where you're asked if somebody says, think of an apple, can you actually see a picture of an apple in your head, or do you just not see that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hyperphantasia. Okay, whatever.
Now that sounds like a Disney term.
This is well, thank you, Google. This is also like aphantasia. Oh no, okay. So it's aphantasia.
Right.
So I was close. Okay. I had the first. I had the part of it, and I'm like, no, that's
you just missed the middle bit out.
And this is
so anytime anybody accuses AI for hallucinating, just remember the benchmark here is short.
I was just gonna say, this is why both AI and humans can be very dangerous. When you're like,
when you get to sort of my ChatGPT pulled a Sean the other day.
That's right. It just it Seaned all over this thing, dude. Oh my God. I was talking about red apples, and all of a sudden I got this like learning disorder thing going on. But yeah, so the real term is aphantasia, the ability to form a picture in your mind. So, and some of I myself, we talked about, I forget which episode that was. It was a long time ago. Yeah. But like someone like myself, I would describe myself as in that like hyper, like I can not only visualize these things, I can rotate them. And and other people are like, nah, see, I understand it, but
I can't. I've got the concept of what it is you're talking about in my head, but not a visualization. It's something way more sophisticated than a 3-dimensional visualization.
Yeah, that's cool. That's
I'm glad you think my inadequacies are cool.
It's cool, man, because now it's a spectrum here. And
right, there we are. Yes.
And also you can be the proxy also when you're like, wait, what? When I'm sitting there like, and then you just rotate this mental model upside down and inside out, and then it's obvious, right?
Where's the apple in all this?
Yeah. What part did the apple go into again? I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. But yeah, so hey, I don't know. I figured we'll just take a quick break and we'll jump back in this, and we'll jump into the futures cone, or as also sometimes that's been referred to as the cone of time. Maybe that's a better cliffhanger. The cone of time.
The cone of time.
All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. like the cone of time has predicted, I have arrived at the projected future of right now. I am Sean Leahy, joined by my amazing golden ears co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And hey, that means you are listening to an episode of Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like what will it mean to be human in the future?
Especially in the cone, which we've been talking about, now I realize, ever since episode 1.
That's right. And so our taglines, everywhere you see the Modem Futura stuff, we always talk about those 3 sort of plural futures, right? The possible, probable, and preferable. Those, just to kind of back up a little bit, those go back to these essentially the origins of future studies as a field. Those come out of, there's a lot of contributing factors. One of the most prominent ones is Wendell Bell and his sort of the foundations of future studies is the role of future studies is to examine and invent those possible futures, to examine them. Again, always when we talk about future stuff, we're never talking about making predictions of the future. No, we can't. But what we are doing is investigating and examining possible futures to question them, to interrogate them, to understand what kinds of challenges, uncertainties, opportunities, all the way through being very practitioner-based or actionable to understand, what do we need if we want to get to some desirable future state, or we want to stay away from something terrible. What do we need to start doing today to start thinking about as time starts to unfold? What are those major things, events, what have you, that we need to think about? And so as a conceptual tool for kind of helping people figure this out, there is a really classic tool. So if you pick up a book that's like Intro to Futures, it better have a futures cone in it. Otherwise you can say this is garbage. You've been peddled.
Didn't pass the test.
That's right. You've been peddled something that's not correct. Because the reason is, again, when I think when most people think about the future, right, which is also when you're just getting exposure. So if you're new to the show, welcome always. But you'll also hear, if you're a longtime listener, this is not the first time you've heard me talk about the plurality of the word future, right? There's a reason and intentionality that we talk about futures.
Yes. Which is worthwhile talking about again because it confuses a lot of people.
They think,
surely there's just one future.
Yeah.
We're not talking about parallel universes.
No. Well, I mean, that's the fun part is you can branch off and say, well, because the reason we don't talk about future, because a lot of people think of the future as a singular destination, a singular point in time, that the future is a fixed point. But the reality is we don't think about the future as a fixed finite state. It will eventually happen. And that's also, just to back up a little bit, one of the unique things about future studies is that we are literally studying something that doesn't exist. Like many other
that sounds like pretty much every academic I know.
Well, everyone, it's in favor now. Everyone wants to claim to be a future. It's like they want to be a leader in AI and a futurist on LinkedIn, apparently.
I know.
But it is a weird thing when you think about it compared to other academic disciplines that are studying things that are observable, testable, whatever, that a lot of our work is focused on something that does not exist yet. And it will. Which one comes, I don't know. But it's an interesting space, but that's kind of the idea behind it, is that there are so many variables, so many complex systems at play that you can never with certainty ever say predict, that something will happen, because even in your own life, when you are certain that this thing is going to come to pass, that means it certainly will not. It seems to be the case.
But you can put boundaries on it.
That's right.
Which I think is so interesting. But also, as we're going to get into, as soon as you put boundaries on things, you can work out how you can sort of tweak those boundaries so things are more likely to go in one direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of where the futures cone comes in. And this is, when we were talking about the workshop that we had prepared before, when I often do a futures workshop, one of the first tools I often introduce is the futures cone, or the cone of time, because one of the first challenges when you start thinking about this sort of really sort of speculative, murky landscape out there as called the futures, it sometimes takes a little reorientation to think about how you think about time and conceptual and possibilities. I mean, that's the other piece here. And so the futures cone is a wonderful sort of simple and iconic visual tool, which is perfect for an audio medium.
Right.
But it's one of these tools that at first sight and at first encounter of it, it is very simple and straightforward. But the more time you spend on it or with it, the deeper and deeper it can go.
And it's the hallmark of a good conceptual model that you can actually extract more and more value from it as you begin to play with it.
Yep, absolutely. And so I'm gonna attempt.
You're gonna describe this.
I'm gonna describe it, and for anyone who has access, I'll put links in the show notes for where you can grab a copy of the visual. But also, if you want to watch us on YouTube, this would be a reason to do that because I will overlay.
Because I'm gonna hold up my picture here, so you can actually see it. Sean actually sent me this just before the show, just to make sure I knew what he was talking about.
And I was like, again, it's one of those ill-conceived ideas where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna talk about the Futures Cone. This is amazing. Everyone needs to know about this. And I'm like,
actually, it's I think it's really easy to explain visually.
Okay, especially again, this is why the polarity of the aphantasia is did I get that wrong again? Whatever. The ability to mentally vision these models. Okay, so as I begin to describe this, again, when we talk about, even in our tagline, the possible, probable, and preferable futures, for a long time, the field of futures basically leverage those three. And then, of course, over time, as with anything, you're like, well, actually, there's way more than three because we can start thinking about, does those terms of possible, probable, and preferable, are they too limited in how we're thinking about? Again, if you think about the total futures, it is anything and everything that's anything you can imagine, anything you can't imagine, right? It literally encompasses anything that could possibly take place. And so
but here, and so it's worthwhile taking a diversion here because this links into so much work that I've done over the years on emerging technologies. Because if you're dealing with a brand new technology, and many years ago, it used to be nanotechnology for me, but of course now it's AI, it's easy to imagine sort of every possible amazing, wonderful, crazy scenario. You just need to go to sci-fi, imagine all of those things. But you need some way of collapsing that down because if you give the absolutely, utterly absurd the same weight as the incredibly likely, there's nothing you can do with that. And so that's where you begin to come to how you conceptualize a model that helps you sort of weed out the things that we maybe ought to be thinking about versus the things that are really in the realm of sci-fi.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, even with that, right, it's a way of testing, like what's again amazing about the cone, and I'll particularly going to be talking about one from Joseph Voros, who has said of like, it's my preferred cone. Everyone has their own preferred tools. I like the Voros cone myself. Okay, right. But it is. So what it can do also is allow you, just like when we talked about in a previous episode, when we talked about the futures triangle and the intent map, is a way of pulling things out of the abstract or out of that cloud, if you will, of sort of uncertainty and confusion and complexity. And it allows you to be able to begin to talk about it and articulate it and test ideas or assumptions against them. And that's really sort of, again, when we come back to this very sort of iconic futures tool of the cone, is to do a couple of things. One is to start having us thinking about time in a much broader sense than just this short term, right in front of us, sort of linear progression, right?
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to,
so describe it.
Okay. So here we go. All right. So what we're going to do, so it's not a triangle. We're going to add our dimension.
No, it's a cone. It's a cone, not a triangle.
It's not a triangle. It is a cone. And so think about like, if you need to think about like those like cone party hats, right? Or something, or a traffic cone or whatever sort of
ice cream cone works.
Ice cream cone. Yeah. And so the easiest way to understand how this is if you take a cone and you hold it in your hands sideways. So the pointy bit of the cone is hitting like your left hand if you were holding your two hands out in front of you.
And the pointy bit is now.
The pointy bit is...
And the wide bit of the funnel is the future.
That's right.
Somewhere in the future.
Right. So when you hold this cone in your hands, the pointy bit that's poking you in the palm of your left hand, that is the today, that is the present, that is the now. And however big you imagine that cone to be, by the time you get to the end of it where it has flared out to its largest size, that is essentially the surface area of the future.
Yes.
Now, how long is that future? That's up to you because the sort of I guess it would be in geometric terms, the height of the cone, how tall the cone is. Right. That is the progression of time, which is completely arbitrary up to the individual who's using the tool.
Yes.
So
because it's your tool, and you realize all this is just a test to see how you can actually explain something that nobody can see. So, but actually, the more serious thing is, and I think that this is intuitive, that as you think about sort of stepping forward in time, each step you take, the number of possibilities expands. So that surface of the cone actually captures inside of it all of those expanding possibilities. And the further you get away from the present, the bigger those possibilities are, so the wider the cone is.
Yep, exactly. And so if you imagine this cone, and if you imagine a straight line that goes from the center of the point to
right down the middle.
Right down the middle. So straight through. What are those ice cream cones that have the chocolate bar through the center of them? Do you know what those are?
I want to say cornettos, but it's not a yes.
It's the cornetto of the line, right? It's the chocolate bar.
They don't have the line straight through the middle, but yes.
It's wonky because, they're just, we don't. Okay. Well, anyway, imagine that line. So you have
the cornetto version of the future, yes.
So you have this.
I want the ice cream.
I know. Yes. Dang it. We need to get one of those. Can we get something on order here? Can we get some ice cream cones? But so if you take a straight line from that pointy bit all the way to the end that stays in the dead center or the bullseye of that sort of that large flared out end, that is essentially what's called the projected line.
Right.
So that is these are all speculative, hypothetical trajectories of today.
But it feels like the business as usual. If you were to assume everything carried on as it's carried on in the past, that's the line that you would expect us to follow.
And that takes a lot of assumptions because it would assume things that would continue linearly based on how things. Basically, that is if it works tomorrow the way it worked today, it's just going to keep on. And ultimately, when we do a lot of futures work, that is one of the biggest trappings that people fall into, is that by default, a lot of people think, the future is going to be that's like oftentimes when you say, like, what's your vision of the future? Looks just like today, except for one variable. We're all in spacesuits or whatever it might be, right?
But that's, it's part of the human survival suite of mechanisms. Because if we were constantly thinking that tomorrow is going to be nothing like yesterday, we wouldn't have any predictive power. We wouldn't be able to have any certainty. We'd just go crazy thinking about all the possibilities. So we were sort of like pre-programmed to think or to assume that tomorrow is going to be the same as yesterday because it means we can plan.
That's right. And so now, if you have that center line, now as you think it's the rings sort of, the diagram will show these as rings. But again, where the hard boundaries, this is just to kind of help show it, but there's no actual boundary between these things, right?
It's conceptual.
But so as the future state walks away from that center line, things get more and more difficult or opaque, more and more difficult to understand, right? So if we take that center line as the middle, one of the next steps out there is one of the ones that you hear from our show all the time is the probable future, right? Yes. So in the order, I'm just going in order of like expanse here. So
again, and I'm sort of visualizing this. So you imagine sort of actually this is a triangle, not a cone, but it works. So you sort of put your palms together. And then you sort of open up your palms with the heel of your hands together. So you have that sort of triangle of that cone. The more wide they get, you increase that surface, and you go from that sort of projected future out to the probable future a little bit wider, and then we're going to look at other things as they get wider and wider.
That's right. And you can think of like the widening of the end of that cone is because the uncertainty is growing.
Right. Yes.
So and if you think about it, again, we don't predict the future, but if you could, right, what that cone would represent is it becomes more and more difficult to predict that future.
So less certain towards the edges of the cone. Sort of, lower probability.
Lower probability. It would require for that future to come true. It usually would require significant changes. Either, these could be innovations, disruptions, alien invasions. Like who knows, right? It could take wildly speculative things to happen for those edge futures to come true. So pressed up nice and tight close to the projected future is the probable future, which is like, again, projected future, history tells us that doesn't usually happen. Right. But probable futures can. And
there's a range of probabilities, yes.
And also, again, coming in, the reason there's no definitive timeline is this: if you're talking about this cone, this futures cone in this length of, let's say, 1 year, a projected future is way easier and more probable to predict than if you're talking 100 years, right?
So it's like projecting where snooker balls go, or if you're playing pool or something.
Exactly.
You could almost predict. Well, in fact, you can predict sort of after one or two collisions because that's what a professional player does.
Sure.
But you simply cannot predict where things are going to be after multiple
That's
collisions.
right. And then, a really sort of tortured example is like, I can project with a very high level of confidence that the sun will rise tomorrow morning. Now, if that timeline is far enough, there will come a time where that no longer holds. There will come a time when we are swallowed up by our sun as a red giant, and that is no longer true. But that projected future, again, depending on your length of time, and for the fun, for while we're doing it together, let's do something kind of fun. Let's do like 100 years. Okay. So when you reach that 100 years, there's a lot that can happen. If you think historically what happened in the last 100 years,
which is actually a great example. So if you were to sort of wind the clock back 100 years and imagine we were sort of doing this podcast then, probably with sort of thin copper wires because we wouldn't have anything else,
can we
or maybe the odd banana in there. Yes, right.
Modem Futura. I don't even know. I don't know.
But you can imagine if we were beginning to sort of think about sort of projected futures, we would sort of say, well, sort of 100 years from now, maybe we'd have incrementally improved from the horse and cart, or maybe those early automobiles, but maybe not much else.
Yeah,
it would have been inconceivable. That back then we would have been be imagining a world that is transformed by AI and with synthetic biology and nanotech
right. Like that we have three like magic slabs of glass talking to other slabs of glass.
Right.
We can see ourselves,
which simply shows that the projection is almost always wrong. But it means that you've got that cone of probabilities where it's very, very hard to tell where you're going to land within that cone.
And sometimes a fun activity too is always going backwards. That's one of the other side when we talk like futures is in many ways the flip side of the coin to history, right? Because that's so powerful also to understand like how the hell did we get here?
Right. Yes,
From that, again, if you go back, pick a time frame, 100 years, 200 years, 3, 5, whatever. How did we get here? What had to happen? Because if you're like, okay, if that projected future had come true, we'd be sitting here with like cool top hats and talking with a funny,
we'd be all steampunk.
We'd be all steampunk, and it would be maybe cool. I don't know. But clearly that didn't happen.
Right,
and so we took all these bumps. But so probable, that's the time frame that is more still some variability. But current trends tell us that we should expect kind of this. As you start moving out, then we get to the plausible future, which is like our current. This is where we get into this space where we're like, this could happen. Like we can see how major events, and this is a space that we work in a lot especially when we're thinking about sort of the nearer term, 5, 10, 20 years. A lot of geopolitical stuff happens in here where you're like, well, we can see the trends and the destabilization of this or that. And so these are the futures that we think are very plausible given current knowledge.
That's right. As you begin to bring these things together and as you apply quite a lot of sort of theory and understanding, you can begin to sort of map out sort of where things are likely to diverge from the projected. But of course, you're still dealing with possibilities and probabilities here.
Absolutely. So now if you're doing the hand cone,
so a little further.
We're out a little farther. And then we get to our other familiar space, which is the possible. Which again, originally that was sort of seen as like the end boundaries of this because the possible is this like future, the expectation of future knowledge of this might happen. And within there, this is where a lot of speculation that, again, when we're thinking like, oh, robots will take over the world, blah, blah, that's in a possible future.
Capitalism will collapse and we'll have a completely different economic system.
That's right.
We'll discover alien life.
A post-scarcity model is possible. All this kind of stuff, right? Like the possible futures is a really fun space because that's usually like that first layer of really speculative futures. Most of our sci-fi lives in there to a certain degree.
To a certain extent, but some of it goes into the next category you're going to mention.
Which is a really fun one, which is the preposterous with an exclamation point. The preposterous future.
So and this to me, this boundary between the possible and what you refer to here as the preposterous is really important because without that understanding that some things are low probability but possible versus some things are impossible. You can't say anything constructive about the future. And this is where people fall into the trap of saying things like, well, one day we may have perpetual motion. One day sort of we'll be able to sort
hyperdrives
of... or even hyperdrive might be possible. But sort of breaking the speed of light and things like that. Or completely reversing the laws of thermodynamics. And the trouble is, some of those are fuzzy. I mean, with physics where it's going at the moment, maybe sometimes we will break over those. But with everything we know with the physical universe at the moment, there are some things that are just impossible.
Yep.
And it's really important to remember that. Otherwise, you end up sort of getting into what are effectively conspiracy theories by saying, well, this might be possible.
Yeah.
And the answer is most cases, no, it won't.
Or potentially we find that boundary where we are inside a simulation and those are only guarding.
And then all bets are off, which is where this really gets fuzzy. But certainly for practicality, it's worthwhile remembering that at the moment is a hard boundary between the possible, where we can begin to speculate about what might occur, versus the preposterous, where it's fun to imagine, but that at best it helps us understand our present condition rather than something that we really could bring about.
Yep, absolutely.
And probably something that every tech entrepreneur should realize, that they need to be able to sort of work within this cone rather than play outside it without realizing they're playing outside it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's that sort of ends like the description of the cone by itself. So that preposterous layer, so that is the shell, if you will. That is the most outer boundary. And it is a section. And so when Joseph Voros created this particular version that I really like to see, that was one of the major things that he sort of added, was this additional ring. Now, at some point, like, what's bigger than preposterous? Maybe I should add my own ring to this and be like, inconceivable or something. I don't know. But that preposterous layer is sort of, it widens the cone quite a bit. And I want to come back to this, the preposterous layer. But the other future that we often talk about is, again, the preferable one, right? Yes. So within this cone, so now if we take this cone, we've got the projected future, the probable, the plausible, the possible, and now the preposterous layer. So our gap is, so then there's this question, right? If we talk about the preferable future, or you can likewise add in the avoidable future or something too.
But this actually, it changes the conversation as well. So up to this point, we're basically saying there are these possibilities. There are higher probability futures and lower probability futures, but we haven't said anything about design or control or anything like that. Now we're getting to ask, well, sort of, we've got this distribution of possible futures. How can we proactively steer ourselves towards some and away from others?
Yep, absolutely. And so the diagram, when you look at it, you'll see the preferable section isn't its own ring. It is a I guess you would call it like cross section is the wrong term. What do you call it when it cuts through the rings?
It is. It's a section or a
section or whatever.
Yes, but it is. It's within. It's embedded within the ring. So now you've sort of mapped out the terrain. You're asking, whereabouts do you want to be within that terrain?
And because if you say, like, I would in the preferable future is where we bring in all of our value judgments, right? That's where we want, like, we talk about this all the time with the future of being human, is the idea is to get to a preferable future that empowers human flourishing and human betterment, whatever that is contextually. But where does that sit? Well, depending on what it is, that can sit across the projected future, the probable future, the plausible future. So you have this this lump that you sort of identify within these ranges of possibilities, these ranges of futures. You can kind of target. You're like, well, our preferred future is going to overlap in these kind of weird areas because there are some things that we might be able to project. There are some things that we might be able to know or be somewhat certain or very speculative. For them to come true, but that preferable future is where you're putting your value judgment on where you want
that's it.
This thing to be.
And it captures this idea, in fact, two ideas. First of all, the future isn't set, which is why we talk about futures. There are multiple possibilities. And we have some agency in steering things. And that's the second bit of it, that this isn't a passive process. Humans have got this incredible ability to imagine different possibilities. And because we can imagine a future that is different from the present, and we have the ability to develop tools to steer us, we have the ability to actually begin to, in part, design and create and engineer the sort of pathway we want. And this is where we begin to think about, what does that domain of preferable futures look like, and how are we going to get there? And especially because that sort of spreads across the projected, probable, and plausible, we know there's a trade-off. So we can say we want a future which is in the plausible futures or possible futures area. Now, the energy and the innovation required to get to a possible future, because it's right at the edge of the cone, is way, way greater than going to a probable future. So we have these choices, but there are trade-offs here.
Yep, absolutely. And then, and again, there's also all the elements that you can't control. Right. So the wild cards, the things that happen in between that, could fundamentally shift something from being, possible to plausible to,
Which is where this is also a dynamic cone. So it's like the ice cream cone, which is sort of waving around. It's never
it's melting.
Still.
It's melting. I don't know. It's all. This is the time where you're like, oh no, and you discover the role humidity plays and how fast your ice cream melts.
What does it mean when somebody drops it and steps on it and gets crushed?
That's when you've crossed.
That's the crushed future.
That's when you cross the preposterous barrier and you're just like, let's just go home. Time to go home. Yes. So I do want to come back to this piece around the preposterous layer, because there's, again, the one of the reasons why I really like the Voros cone is also there is a paper, and I'll link to it if people are interested to dive deeper. There's a paper from 2003 that kind of goes into talking about sort of this formation of the cone. And there's this really cool thing called the Clarke Dator line. Okay. So what this refers to is basically that there's in the effort to sort of work around that limitation where the possible future wasn't big enough, and how to go to this preposterous. And as we talked about that, right, that's where things are like, it's this line where things are it'd be dismissed as impossible or it can't happen. But it really comes into this idea of like, how do we think about that and test it in terms of mentally? So how do we actually progress it? So it comes from, so the dator in the law is from James Dator, who had a law from Hawaii, who's a foundational member in future studies, that basically said that any useful idea about the future should appear ridiculous. Right. So it's a stance of like, if it's about the future, it should appear to us today as ridiculous. Just like you would say, if this was 1926 and going, well, gee, one day I'll be talking into a speaky box and my picture will go onto the interwebs, but no one, and then describe that. People will be like, you are absolutely bonkers and you go in the madhouse. You're insane. And the Clarke comes from famous scientific author Arthur C. Clarke, with this idea that the only way of finding the limits of the possible is by going beyond them into the impossible. Right. So together that this idea of you kind of combine them to this like Clarke Dator boundary, the idea of it is crossing outwards into this is one of the hardest things with futures is to really find that line between what seems to be impossible from today's perspective, but once we cross that line is a known possibility. And an example that he gives in the paper is about the Apollo 11 mission, right? This moon landing idea, right? Which at one point would have been preposterous and ridiculous.
Though I'm going to push back on this.
Sure.
This is the physicist in me that comes out. So this makes sense. And I know about, especially Arthur C. Clarke's sort of talking, and his sort of well-quoted quips about sort of any sufficiently advanced technology will
appear as magic and all that.
I actually disagree.
Okay.
And I disagree because if you look at sort of virtually every single seemingly transformative step forward, including the Apollo missions, they have a provenance of people that actually had that vision, and they're built step by step on stuff that works, on good engineering, on good physics, on good science. So there is that line of provenance. You almost never get something that completely sidesteps that line of provenance. So now you've got a domain where, yes, maybe somebody who doesn't know anything about sort of the way things work will say, this is magic, this is impossible. But people that actually understand the science say, no, this is hard, but absolutely this is possible. Versus the people that understand the science say, no, there are some things that are impossible. So you turning into a frog the next second. I don't think there's anything in our science that indicates that that's possible.
Enough? Is there a CRISPR tool like?
No. So this is where I would say, maybe you can create a plausible argument, but there are some things where if you know the science, you can say this is incredibly hard, this is incredibly complex, but you can sort of see a line between sort of where we are now and where it might come about, versus things which are utterly nonsensical.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's true. Although what I would say with like that line is that this idea behind that Dator-Clarke line is to really sort of find that fuzzy area outside the ring of the ring of possible.
Yes.
Because what is possible is our future knowledge, and that's a really you know, and where does that line cross between? Because again, if you think back, you go back far enough, right? And again, this is from used at a tool like, again, that pointy bit is now. So if you rewind the clock, if you can just look historically, I mean, we can keep the thing of like the moon landing. We didn't even know if there was air. Like, you know, so I mean, the science was like, we did not know.
Yes.
And so at that time you would said, oh, that's you know, or the reverse. Oh, that'll be easy because it's just like flying in the air. We just have to fly all the way there.
Yes. So you've got that lack of knowledge, that deficit of knowledge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And again, also thinking about it just in that. So it's like when you are using that tool, that's when you're sort of investigating and pushing on that.
Yes.
Not following it linearly through the progression of time. Because then you're like, well, yeah, as things become learned, as new science is discovered, as things are created and new knowledge is gained, that then changes the now, and then theoretically changes where that might land on on that scale. But that's, I think, from a conceptual tool perspective, that's one of those things to like stress test those concepts or ideas of, you know, is this preposterous? Is this something that is totally, or are we just outside of the line of what we think of as possible?
No, I think that's exactly right. But it does require, I think, some modulation, because that depends on the knowledge and understanding of the people around the table.
Yeah.
Because if you have a group of people, say you had a group of people thinking about futures, this is going to get weird, but who know absolutely nothing about physics, chemistry, or biology. On one hand, you would expect them to come up with ideas which sound intriguing and possible to them, whereas somebody deep in the science will say that's absolutely nonsense. So that's one side of this, and we see this all of the time with people sort of without knowledge. I mean, there's even a name for this. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know.
The less you know, the more you think you know, and the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
So there is that effect where sort of people think something is plausible, that isn't. But on the other side of this, and this is where things get weird and intriguing, sometimes it's that unbounded creativity that leads to insights that the experts can't see because they're bounded by their own expertise. And so that's a tension I feel daily as a physicist, because I can say that's absolutely ludicrously impossible, because I'm being constrained by what I've been taught. And sometimes you need those wild cards thrown in. Yeah,
well, absolutely. And I was just going to make sure I get it right, because I don't want, but this is also like, I mean, to the point, like in our work, Future of Being Human, that's one of our guiding principles, right? Is this idea of
You're gonna whack me around the head with what
but that's exactly what we draw to this idea of, is that sort of tension between them is being open to radical creativity.
That's exactly it. Yes.
With that, I mean, again, I'm going to rattle these off because these apply directly to what you're talking about. Obsessive curiosity, radical creativity, respectful inclusivity, like not discounting someone because they don't have the science, and being open to their ideas, even if at first glance that might be the preposterous. Let's know. But then deeper, you might go, well, actually, there's something here potentially. And maintaining that grounded exuberance. So when you're like, it's amazing. Oh, wait. Yes. Okay. But, you know, let's be chill.
Maybe you can't turn into a frog. I mean, it's amazing.
I mean, there are some benefits, but there are also some drawbacks. I mean, does that mean you have to like live in the mud and hibernate for a while? I don't know.
What I want to know is how I finish this podcast if you suddenly turn into a frog. This is not a preferable future, Sean.
What if we just discovered the root of that weird buzzing is there's some kind of transformation taking place, and I don't know. We'll see. Will I croak? Will I? Oh, I don't know.
But actually, this is so important, and you can see I'm already falling into my own trap here. Because sometimes we need to be challenged by people that aren't constrained by limited understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, you know, kind of coming back. So I mean, this is the cone. It's not a prediction.
Yes.
It is a speculative. You could even use it as like it's a diagnostic tool for thinking about the future.
Yes.
And this is also where, you know, good futurists who are really skilled at this they'll draw from a diverse group of people to start talking about these, right? Investigating these different things and exploring all of these different elements together to really start to push on exactly that. Like, again, one of the hardest things when you work with a group of people and this could be students, this could be professionals that work in finance or whatever, that are like, yes, let's think about the future. And you come in and you say, all right, let's think about the future. Everyone by default, almost to a person, goes to that projected future, right?
Yes,
that it takes, we're conditioned to that.
Right.
And so it takes a lot of this work to really start to push people, and also to give people, when they're engaging in futures work, to give people the permission to come up with the preposterous stuff.
Yep. No,
Get it out
I
there.
agree. Yes.
Get it out there, because it's not a detriment to talking about the future. It's a boundary.
Yep.
The humanity is all turned into frogs. Okay. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's put it out there.
Where can you go with that? So this is so important. And just to give you an example of how this might work, think about disease.
Yeah.
So disease is endemic to our lives.
Yep.
So then the question is, well, what different futures can you imagine with disease? I mean, the projected future is this assumption that, disease is there. We're just going to have to live with it and suck it up, because there's nothing else we can do. But then you begin to push out those boundaries to the plausible and possible futures.
Yeah.
You get some really interesting places. I mean, even the question of, is it possible to have a future with zero disease? And of course, there's lots of pushback on that. But if you don't have the freedom and the permission to ask the question of what does a disease-free future look like, it doesn't allow you to explore that possibility space. Now, when you've explored it, and you may get all the way from the possibility that maybe we can get rid of disease completely, or maybe we need to completely rethink disease and say, well, actually, it's part of what makes us human.
Yep.
As soon as you have that, you can ask, well, what is the preferable space we want to be in versus the space we really don't want to be in? And work out how you actually chart a pathway there.
Yep, exactly. And just to extend the frog thing, because I like it. I don't know why. I'm like, frogs are cool. I don't know, frogs are cool, man.
Yeah.
But again, so preposterous idea. Humans are turned into frogs. Okay, preposterous. Most people can probably agree with that. But then it's like walking it back then. So it's like, okay, well, what would be the advantages of doing that? Maybe there are, and I'm just going to use the frog, and I don't know much about amphibians or frogs, so gigantic asterisk here. But let's say, okay, frog DNA has some advantage over a disease, illness, or viral thing or whatever. Okay, so maybe it's not really humans turning into frogs, but humans augmenting themselves with other DNA or RNA or whatever to do something to combat disease or aging or whatever it might be. So then you go from that limit of the preposterous, and then you start backing it off a little bit to go, okay, but then it also starts cracking open everything else. What about the ethical considerations? What about all the, what are the unintended consequences of walking around with frog DNA in your body? Right. Like,
and we get to Jurassic Park right away.
And then before you know it, life finds a way.
And this is just a demonstration of how powerful this is. So I came up with the frog idea as just a stupid, crazy, preposterous idea. Apart from the fact,
you did say it was going to get weird, so to your credit.
But now you begin to think about frogs. What is weird and unusual and interesting about frogs?
Yeah.
And one of the things is they undergo a metamorphosis. So you have that
tadpole.
You have that genetic base, that DNA that leads to two utterly different forms. So now you've got. I
got another one too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So we'll get there in a second. But now you think about this. So now there's something in the biology here where what determines the final form is not about the DNA, it's about something else. And that gets into work of people like Michael Levin, who says how you look, how your cells behave differently in different environments is not about their DNA, but about the biological signals around them.
Yeah.
And this says that actually the cells that make up our body can behave in different ways and do different things. So in principle, there is nothing to stop your seemingly human cells starting to behave like frog cells. And that gets us into the preposterous in a number of fairly small steps. Okay. And makes you realize maybe this isn't so preposterous.
See, here we go. See, this is why this stuff is so amazing.
Yes.
Okay, so also I love that idea because also, here's the uneducated anatomy of a frog. They're born as basically fish and then become an amphibian. They're born with gills. They breathe oxygen from the water, and then eventually develop lungs and get on land and then can no longer do that. Also, they lose their tail, they grow legs, they literally become a different creature. Right.
Same DNA.
Same DNA. And also, I would be curious, I don't know how much what is the overlap of frog and human DNA already? Because it's something crazy high with a banana even alone, right? Because we're all made out of the same stuff.
Right.
So that's one thing, right? So now you have this regenerative possibility. Like, I don't know, okay, how could we harness that? Do you lose, and also other amphibians that lose limbs and regrow them. Right. Humans, sadly, we can't do that. If you lose if you're born without, you lose a limb, you can't regrow a human yourself, right?
Which is a great Sorry, I'm going to let you finish this thought, but yes.
But the one that I got excited about when you were, the other thing was also, like I had jokingly mentioned, frogs hibernate. Yeah. They go under, they burrow, and well, at least in cold climates, they burrow under the mud and they stay there until the ice thaws and they come back up. Yeah. Well, we're talking about, even in present day, sending humans on interplanetary missions to Mars, to wherever, that would require hopefully some level of hibernation framework. So one, that they don't just kill each other on the way. Right. But I'm like, okay, so maybe with frog DNA, now not only, see, now it's going to be like, if you want to be an astronaut, you have to have frog DNA because we got to put your ass
in the frog program. we got to experimenting with future astronauts.
We got to put your ass to sleep.
Can imagine what happens when it goes wrong, sort of 1,000 years from now when they come out of hibernation. What will they look like?
Oh my God, it's a nightmare. But it's like, we're going to put your ass to sleep for 9 months and wake you up. So bears, I guess, do it too. So there are mammals that hibernate. Yeah. But the idea is, like, if you could augment your DNA to make you a more adapted astronaut, why? I mean, and so
this
now
is why this is so important. Yes,
we started with the preposterous. Like, we're not turning into frogs. Yes, but we could potentially leverage other animal and desirable traits to augment ourselves to a position that it helps us do what we want to do. Now, whether we should or not, I don't know. That's a different question.
Right. And that comes down to the preferable futures.
Exactly.
But it shows, as you begin to push against those boundaries, you begin to see how that cone of possibilities widens out.
Absolutely.
And it only widens out if you get people that are able to sort of have permission to have indulge in creative thinking.
Yes.
If you are just constrained by very, very narrow thinking, it constrains you to just think about that straight line, and you don't see the other possibilities.
Yeah. If you live on that projected line, like, again, if it's super near term, understandable. Yep. If it's super long term, that's boring. Yeah. Get off the line.
And I've got to throw this in because it gets even wilder. So we're talking about metamorphosis.
Yeah.
Let's look at caterpillars and butterflies.
Oh, gee.
Because essentially what happens then is you have the whole physical body of the caterpillar turned into mush, into soup.
Yeah.
And out of that weird soup comes a butterfly.
Totally.
So what would it look like if we created a future of humans that underwent that sort of metamorphosis? So if you want to do interstellar travel, you want to sort of travel for 1 million years,
God.
can we create a soup out of you?
Could you imagine?
Which then reforms into something, not even sure when it gets there, something which is adept at surviving in the atmosphere or whatever.
That is wild. I don't know of any sci-fi story that has taken that approach to hibernation. All right. So now your hibernation pod isn't this sleek thing with like a glass window
it's
where you
a cocoon.
see,
it's
like
a chrysalis.
Yes, it's a pod of goop.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, we got 2 years to go. Like, activate the thing, and in 2 years you come out and you're like
and that's where your AI comes in, because your AI is going to survive these millions of years. It's going to sort of decide what the perfect profile for reconstituting this goop is.
Yeah, and then because that is a wild thing to think about, because we know already there's so much physical limitations of our human bodies, because we are developed and we have adapted to live on Earth with our gravitational strength and our atmospheric pressure. Because I hope this isn't news, but if humans go to Mars, they may not be able to ever come back in terms of like the physiological changes. Yes. Even just our astronauts that are on the International Space Station go through interesting physical changes as a result of microgravity.
With the eyes in particular.
Eyes,
serious
hearts,
issues, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you're on a place like Mars, which I think is like 1/3 the gravity or something of Earth, after you adjust to that living, assuming you could.
Yes, that gravity, yes.
By the time you came back to Earth, it would crush you. Your heart, I mean, all these things. So they're basically like, well, you know, if you go there, you're kind of staying there unless you go and touch. If you touch and come back, maybe.
Right.
But you could see like, okay, well, what kind of a creature would survive and be adapted to that is what that comes out on the goo. So it's like, I'm almost imagining, right? That's like this future. It's like an exploration ship that's like a fire off these pods of goop to like these different locations. And like, if you land on Mars, you're a 6-legged creature of something. And if you land over on an ice planet, you're like a snake. I don't know.
But this is also a perfect example of the impossible versus the crazy.
Yeah.
Because you can actually create a plausible argument for why this might actually work. There are issues. And to be honest, the biggest issue is not the biology issue. It's the memory issue.
Sure.
But there are ways of getting around that, I suspect.
Sure. I mean, if the journey, I mean, think about that. So I have, okay, and I don't know if you know this. This might be a question for Michael Levin. Is there any way to tell when a caterpillar goes into the metamorphosis state of the chrysalis, do they retain any? So the question is, do they retain the self?
There is evidence that they retain some degree of memory. Now, it's not memory as you might think about it. It's in terms of sort of remembering specific things. But there have been experiments done where they seem to like sort of
food source or something.
Yes, they seem to remember associations between, so for instance, like colors and food sources, stimuli. Yes, so there is something that transmits, which is just crazy weird.
Unfortunately, we don't speak caterpillar or butterfly, so it's hard to ask them. But so even under that, right? You could send out the primordial human goop and have it for like, so again, depending on in the future, right? If we are able to, I don't know what the calculations are. I mean, Mars is at the shortest time frame, I think, is 9 months, roughly. Right?
I think maybe 6 months.
6 months,
at closest, but
and that's by comparison, that is our closest planetary neighbor. Well, actually, is Venus closer to us?
Venus, maybe.
But no one's going to Venus because you will not survive.
Actually, you'll be surprised. You know, there are plans.
There is a probe going back. Yeah.
Well, actually, not only probes, but you can actually live in the atmosphere if you can work out. If you don't want to be on the ground.
Yeah. If you don't get burned.
But anyway,
so even that, right? So, but now think about the moons of Jupiter, moons of Saturn, moons, even in our own solar system, let alone someone finding a way to go to our nearest celestial, solar system neighbor or whatever. You know, you would potentially have enough time where you send the goop opens up and is a human raised by AI, robotic tutors or whatever, raised into like, hey, Shawnee boy, you are now your life. Whether you want it or not, you are now our international explorer, and you are,
the resident number one.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, by the way, your survival really is secondary to this whole thing. So have fun.
But it begins to give you that idea that this is how you open possibilities.
Yeah. And also, I mean, again, this idea that has lived in sci-fi of these generation ships.
Yes.
Right? Which are, if you're not familiar, these are these like grand plans of human survival beyond planet Earth would be like, let's send out these humongous ships with the idea that humans will live out multiple generations, because the time distance between here and the next, let's say, habitable planet could be, in human lifespan years, could be millions or maybe even longer, right? So how does that happen? Well, you just have, humans just carry on living their life. They'll live and die for
several generations.
Multiple. But this way too, you can think about that as a different approach to a generational ship, which is you send out the goo and then it's born and raised and then becomes a person en route in time. So by the time it's at peak physical health and mental strength is when they arrive.
Right. No, I think it's a great idea. It does raise questions about what happens if you mix glute from different vessels together.
And also just
you just have one reservoir of human glute.
So the year is 3026 and we're on planet, something, whatever. And we're going, our population is dimming. Someone call radio back to Earth, have them send out a new batch of glute. Yes. We need some genetic diversity here. Can you please send us some goop, please? Oh my goodness! I don't know how we come back from Goop.
I know.
This is, but to kind of wrap this up or put a
getting more serious again about the code.
I don't know. I'm gonna be thinking about this human Goop pod for the rest of the day, I think.
Right.
But again, coming back, so this is why, and so even just going, what started as just explaining what the cone is, you saw us engaging with it, with this idea of taking these things and just walking through, and you can start to get a glimpse of how much fun you can have with this tool to really start pushing you to start thinking about new things and finding those edges and those boundaries.
And of course, it's not just about science and technology. It's about everything. Anything to do with human life or even life on this planet or in the universe, whether it's political, social, religious, whatever.
And that's one of these things where this tool can be, again, you can engage with it like initially as a very simplistic tool to think about one thing or one item or one possibility that you're thinking about. But then very quickly you understand, like, well, if that one thing were to be possible or plausible or preferable or whatever, what else has to happen for that to come true? And so then you start thinking, well, if that were to happen, it needs this thing. And then, that would need this thing. And that could only happen.
Now you're beginning to touch on other tools in the arsenal.
And then now you've graduated, and it's like, and then we move on to more different tools. But that's why I love the Futures Cone. It is such a rich tool to begin thinking about these things, because again, you might start off with this default mindset of riding that projected future line. Like, it'll work tomorrow the same way it worked today. And before long, when you start engaging this tool, you work your way towards it. You find that preposterous line and then work backwards and then start to fill it in. And then you start to see the three-dimensionality of this time, that it's not just one variable that's traversing through time, that it is surrounded by all these other influences and factors. And so again, something that can start very simple can be very deep in the end and very rich. And even just from that one tool, you can start to, I think we've already defined the original IP for several movies, books, TV shows, and sci-fi. So you heard it here first. But and that's just us having a goof of being a fraud. So it's incredibly powerful. So
just be thankful we didn't start with cockroaches,
which they have their own adaptive traits, right? I mean, when the bombs go off, it'll be cockroaches and Twinkies. They'll be the only thing left on the to survive. Oh my goodness!
All you need, really.
What else do you need? Which is, I'll end on this because I just think it's funny, and I don't know if anybody else thinks it's funny. We live in the desert. There's a lot of cockroaches here, which you don't notice. I still remember one of my first days walking. I was in a building on campus here, and it had it was a strange building. So it's the hallways are exposed to the air. It's an outside. It's common in Arizona. And I'm walking by, and I'm just walking to my office, and comes down the other way as if it was a colleague or coworker, this enormous cockroach. And no one was around in the hall. At least I don't know. And as it walked by, I just said, working hard or hardly working. And I just kept on going. And
these faculty colleagues are getting gnarlier and gnarlier.
And there's a part of me that just wishes, I hope someone saw that, and was just like, what on earth just happened? I don't know. Just the weird, silly things in my brain. But so that's the Futures Cone. That's it's a pretty cool tool. As you can see, I get very animated when we start talking about it.
I'm intrigued to know what comes next with the next lesson with Sean Leahy.
Oh, I know. Well, that's the thing. We can go deep on these things because there are so many tools that we can use in Futures and helping us to make sense of the uncertainty. And again, going back to even plugging our previous episode, if people haven't listened to it, I would suggest you go back and listen to us talk about the Futures Triangle and how to situate yourself when change feels out of control or too fast. Especially as we're talking about like artificial intelligence. I mean, the Futures Cone, the Futures Triangle, the intent map, these are wonderful tools to be able to also bring the right language to yourself. You might have your feelings and you might have your thoughts, but it's a great tool to surface those. And then you can investigate. You can do something. Once you've identified them and put them down, now you can actually do something with them. So it's incredibly fun. Well, I say we wrap that up. We wrap that cone up and send it on its way. And
See what comes next.
We'll see what comes next. But yeah, absolutely fantastic conversation. And if I would love to hear if people are if they ever use the Futures Cone for anything, please let us know. But also just a call for all of our loyal Modem Futura fans and followers, and for anyone who is just joining us.
So I was going to say, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Sort of leave us a review, leave us something.
Yeah.
But I would also say, because I've no idea how many people actually get to the end of this podcast, so send us a signal if you're listening to this now.
That's right.
Go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, and just leave us a rating or review, because it'll show that you're still alive.
It'll be proof that the human pod Goop has you've emerged from the chrysalis goop of the human pod. Yeah. So that's fantastic. Well, awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew. And but yeah, so for myself and from Andrew, thank you for listening, and we'll catch everybody on a plausible, probable, preferable, preposterous episode of Modem Futura in the future.
We'll see you there.
End transmission.